You know when you're watching a movie and you get to the special features and you see the deleted scenes? Sometimes they fill in these huge plot holes and totally change how you see the whole story. Well, what if I told you the Bible has something just like that? Let's dive into the story behind the Bible's very own deleted scenes.
I know, that's a huge question, right? But it's a fair one, because for hundreds and hundreds of years, different versions of the Bible actually had a whole collection of extra books. Books that most of us today have never even heard of. So, what happened to them?
This quote right here, this gets to the very heart of the mystery. It's pointing to this silent period between the Old and New Testaments. We're talking about roughly 400 years where it looks like nothing's happening. But history didn't just stop. Huge ideas were bubbling up, ideas that would completely set the stage for the world of the New Testament. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at these missing pieces, then we'll define what the Apocrypha actually is. After that, we'll take a tour of some truly wild stories from these books. Then we'll see how they connect the Old and New Testaments, and finally, we'll talk about why they still matter so much today. Okay, so let's start with the problem itself, this huge historical and theological gap. The world at the end of the Old Testament just feels so different from the one Jesus walks into in the New. How did Jewish thought change so dramatically in those so-called silent years? Well, the answer, or at least a huge part of it, is in this collection of texts known as the Apocrypha. The word itself means hidden things, which is pretty cool, right? And these books, they're kind of the key to unlocking that silent period. So let's get a clear idea of what they actually are. So the word Apocrypha literally means hidden things. In this context, it's the name for a bunch of books that were included in the early Greek and Latin translations of the Old Testament. But, and this is the important part, they weren't in the original Hebrew Bible. And that little difference is the key to this whole story. Think of it this way. It all depended on which ancient library you were using. The Hebrew Bible, which was mostly used in Palestine, is what most modern Protestant Old Testaments are based on. But the Greek-speaking Jews and almost all of the early Christians, they were using translations like the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate, and those versions included all these extra books. For them, these stories weren't extra, they were just part of the Bible. And this is where it gets really fun. I mean it. These are not boring, dry theological texts. We're talking epic tales full of spies, monsters, and even some pretty clever detective work. Let's jump into a few of the wildest ones. First up, the Book of Judith, and I'm telling you, this thing reads like a modern spy thriller. You have the city of Bethulia, it's under siege by this terrifying Assyrian general Holofernes, and everything seems completely hopeless. And that's when Judith, this incredibly pious widow, steps up. She hatches this unbelievable plan to basically use her beauty as a weapon, sneak into the enemy camp, get the general to trust her, and then assassinate him. It is a story of just incredible courage and espionage. Okay, next up we have the Book of Tobit. And if Judith was a thriller, this is a straight-up supernatural fantasy adventure. I mean, it's got it all. We're talking angels in disguise, a giant man-eating fish, and a jealous demon who murders a woman's 7 previous husbands on their wedding nights. The plot is just wow. So our hero, Tobias, is being guided on his journey by the angel Raphael, who's in disguise, by the way. Raphael tells him to use parts of a fish to make a magic charm. So on his wedding night, Tobias burns the fish's heart and liver, and the smoke drives the murderous demon away, saving his bride. You can't make this stuff up. And for our last story, we've got a little something extra from the book of Daniel. It's called Bel and the Dragon. And this one, it's a classic whodunit, with Daniel playing the part of Sherlock Holmes. So here's the setup. The priests of this idol, called Bel, claim it magically eats all the food offerings every single night. But Daniel, he's not buying it. So he sets this perfect little trap. He secretly sprinkles a fine layer of ash all over the temple floor. The next morning, yep, the food's gone, but the ash reveals a trail of footprints leading right to a secret door. He completely exposes the priests as frauds who are sneaking in and eating the food themselves. Okay, so as fun as these stories are, and they are really fun, they're not just entertainment. They actually play this vital theological role. They form a crucial bridge, connecting the world and the ideas of the Old Testament with what we find in the New. You see, the writings of the Apocrypha, they fit perfectly into that 400-year silent gap we talked about. And this is where the magic happens. It's during this time that we see the development of these huge religious ideas about the Messiah, about angels, about the afterlife that become absolutely central to the New Testament. And you can see this happening right in the text. For example, the Book of Wisdom starts to bring in Greek philosophical ideas, like the preexistence of souls. It also has this powerful line, God created man for immortality. But here's the real kicker. In the Book of Enoch, we see, for the first time in a Jewish text, key messianic titles like the Son of Man and Christ being used to describe a coming Savior. Think about that. The very language the New Testament writers will use for Jesus, it's being developed right here in these books.
So you see, these books are so much more than just old, forgotten stories or historical curiosities. They are absolutely essential for understanding the roots of so many foundational beliefs in both Judaism and Christianity. And look, you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to what some major biblical scholars have said. They argue that a true, deep understanding of the New Testament is only possible through a careful study of these very works. The Apocrypha provides the missing context, the language, the entire theological world that came next.
So in the end, that deleted scenes idea we started with, it's a good start. But the Apocrypha is even more than that. It's the essential bridge between the two testaments. It's a window into this incredibly dynamic period of religious evolution. And it's a library full of stories that are just as powerful as any you'll find in the official canon. And that leaves us with one final thought. The Bible didn't just fall out of the sky as one finished book. It was put together over centuries, like a library, with passionate, fiery debates over which books belonged inside. So what does it mean for us, today, when we finally discover and read these powerful stories that were, for a long, long time, left on the shelf?